Over a 2-month period, 7 young women had disappeared without a trace in the city of Adelaide. As months and years passed with still no contact from the missing women, investigators began to fear the worst. Around 3,000 people were reported missing each year in South Australia, and usually all but a few would be located, so when none of the girls missing in that 2-month period were found, they knew it had to be more than coincidence. On April 25, 1978, Bill Thomas and his wife Valda were collecting mushrooms in bushland near the small town of Truro, 80 kilometres northeast of Adelaide. The couple found what they believed to be a bone from the leg of a cow. However, concerned about the discovery, Valda convinced her husband to check the area again 2 days later. Upon closer inspection, they noticed that there was a shoe attached to the bone. Inside the shoe was human skin and painted toenails. After finding a skull, other bones, bloodstains and items of clothing, Bill Thomas called police. Personal items found at the scene identified the victim as 18-year-old Veronica Knight, who went missing on December 23, 1976. When she had become separated from her friend while at a shopping mall, there were no clues at the scene leading towards a suspect, and Knight's cause of death was unable to be determined. On April 15, 1979, almost a year after the discovery of Veronica Knight's remains, bushwalkers found the skeleton of another missing teenager. 16-year-old Sylvia Pittman went missing on February 6, 1977. She was located just 1 kilometre from where Knight was found. Investigators quickly linked the two murders and suspected that there were more bodies dumped in the area. 11 days into a large search of the area, searchers found 2 more skeletons in a paddock on the opposite side of the road, where the first 2 bodies were found. They were the remains of 26-year-old Vicky Howell, who had gone missing a day after Sylvia Pittman on February 7. The other was 16-year-old Connie Jordanides, who disappeared on the 9th. Certain they were dealing with a serial killer, police announced that they believed it was a local man who was a sex offender and had likely been released from prison shortly before the killings had started. Newspapers all around the country reported on the story, and a $30,000 reward was offered for information that would catch the killer. Worryingly, there were still 3 women on the December 76 to February 77 missing list that were yet to be located, leading police to believe that there were more bodies still to be discovered. In May 1979, after numerous appeals to the public, detectives finally got a break in the case. A woman named Amelia told police that she knew of a man who could help them with their investigation. Amelia claimed that at a funeral in February 1977, James Miller had revealed to her that the girls had been done in by the man whose funeral they were attending, Christopher Worrell. Miller told Amelia that the murdered women were just rags and not worth much, and that they had been buried near Blanchetown, a town 45 kilometres east of Truro. Miller would add that he did the driving and ran along to make sure that nothing went wrong. They had to be killed, so they would not point the finger at us. If you don't believe me, I'll take you to where they are. It was getting worse lately. It was happening more often. It was perhaps a good thing that Chris died. James Miller was described as a homosexual loner that had no formal education and spent most of his years in prison for stealing. He was serving 3 months when he met Christopher Worrell, who was awaiting trial on a rape charge. Miller quickly became infatuated with the charismatic young man, and the pair became friends. Worrell told Miller that he never knew his real father, and also claimed that he had served time in the Royal Australian Air Force. When Worrell was sentenced, the judge described him as a depraved and disgusting human being. He fit the police's profile perfectly. He was jailed for attempted rape and was released in October 1976. His death just 7 days after the last disappearance was a good explanation as to why there were no more women going missing in the city. Miller and Worrell became lovers when they were released from prison. They lived and worked together. Miller was entirely dependent on Worrell. He worshipped him. Although Worrell himself was not a homosexual, he let Miller perform sexual acts on him while he read BDSM magazines. The pair would often pick up gay men, go back to the man's house and rob them, threatening to tell others that they were gay. Miller was so devoted to Worrell that he would sleep in his car overnight in front of the hotels his friend was in with a girlfriend. On February 19, 1977, Worrell, Miller, and a woman named Deborah Scoose were returning from Mount Gambier. Worrell was driving erratically after consuming several cans of beer when the vehicle spun out of control onto the other side of the road into oncoming traffic. In an effort to avoid a head-on collision, Worrell careered the car off the side of the road, where it rolled multiple times until it came to rest, with the 3 occupants spilled out onto the grass. Christopher Worrell and Deborah Scoose died at the scene, while Miller suffered a shoulder injury and was in complete shock after losing the one and only friend he ever had. Christopher Worrell died at the age of 23. On May 23, 1979, police brought James Miller in for questioning. The now 39-year-old became homeless following the death of Worrell and was suffering from depression. He made no omissions at first to police, but eventually stated that Amelia had done what I should have done. He revealed to police that there were 3 more bodies and that he would show them where they were located. The police took Miller to Truro, where he first directed them to where the first 4 bodies had been found. He headed further into the bush and stopped at a large shrub, and told police that they might find another body there. He was right. Curled up under the tree was the skeleton of Juliet Makeda, the 16-year-old who went missing on January 21, 1977. Next, Miller was taken to Port Gawler Beach. After extensive searching, police discovered the body of 20-year-old Deborah Lamb, who went missing on February 12, 1977. She was Christopher Worrell's last victim, and according to forensics, suffered the most brutal attack. Her ankles and wrists were bound with cord, her pantyhose were wrapped around her neck and mouth, and sand and shell grit found in her lungs indicated that she had been buried alive. Lastly, Miller directed detectives and searchers to Wingfield. Police were unable to locate any remains at first, but after more extensive searching, they eventually found the skeleton of 15-year-old Tanya Kenny, who disappeared on January 2, 1977. The 7 missing young women had all been found. James Miller was charged with 7 counts of murder. His trial began in February 1980. He testified that he would drive Worrell around the local streets every night, looking for women that Worrell could have sex with. Miller would drive Worrell and the women to a secluded place, where Worrell would have sex with the woman, often after tying them up, while Miller waited outside the car. Afterwards, Miller would drive them back into town and drop them off. It was fine at first, but Miller would state that his friend began raping the women, and then he started murdering them. Miller was unaware that murder would occur prior to it happening, stating that it only happened sometimes and not the others. As the violence increased, Miller became increasingly fearful of Worrell, stating that if he tried to intervene he would be killed too. They can give me life for knowing about the murders and not reporting them, but they charged me with murder. It's a load of bullshit. Nobody turns into a cold-blooded murderer overnight, or helps commit murder. I'm just an ordinary thief. No killer. I've never been a violent man, Miller said. The Crown prosecutor countered by stating, "You will never know the truth, but have no doubt that it is a horrible truth that these young women were murdered, because they were going to point the finger at the young man who tied them up and sexually abused them. They could also point the finger at the older man who ignored their plight and their terror. If a man assists another by driving him to a place where a girl is going to be raped and killed, then he is guilty of murder. No rapist and murderer could have had a more faithful or obliging ally." On March 12, 1980, after a 6-week trial, James Miller was found guilty of 6 counts of murder. He was acquitted of the murder of Veronica Knight, as the jury agreed that he did not know Worrell was going to kill the girl. He was found guilty of murder despite allegedly having never touched the victim. He was sentenced to the maximum 6 consecutive terms of life imprisonment. James Miller protested his innocence for years, including participating in a 43-day hunger strike, which ended in July 1984. At its conclusion, when interviewed, he stated, "Chris Worrell was my best friend in the world. If he had lived, maybe 70 would have been killed, and I would have never dobbed him in." On October 21, 2008, at the age of 68, Miller died of liver failure as a complication of having hepatitis C. He also suffered from prostate cancer and lung cancer. At that point, he was one of the longest-serving prisoners in the state.